We have a new feature which we would like to call GUI placeholders. Within your component, you have areas where you can add custom code in different places. One of the places, for example, here in the component main area, we have this placeholder, this custom code that's going to end up in the site helper class. So we have this custom code added here to do some nice dates for this component. You might also add custom code to your admin view, so we can open that, and you have this area called custom buttons where you could have methods added to the controller or to the model or to the list controller or list model. This is all what we would call custom code blocks across JCB. A lot of places where you can reach in and add your own custom code. All of these are similar to the others I've shown you. And there's always been an option to edit code in the IDE, and then when you compile the component, it basically scrapes the changes back into JCB. That's also called custom coding, but we will want to start calling that direct IDE custom coding, simply because we have sort of an overlap of functions which do different things but have the same name, and it is the name custom codes. So custom codes, if I open that, you have this JCB manual, which is you literally going and saying, okay, here is custom code, and you can use that name as a placeholder. It will adapt it and give you the placeholder here, and now you can add your code here and you can save it. So immediately you have what we call a custom code snippet or placeholder, which you now can go and use in those areas we looked at previously. So if I go to the admin area and I open that admin view, and we decide, okay, we want to, in the get items method, we want to add this custom code here, okay, which will now, if I save it, dynamically generate a link back to that custom code. So I can click on here and actually go and edit the code, and it will show me if I've used it in other places in around JCB. It's scanning the database via Ajax to determine wherever this code is being used. This implementation is very useful if you have snippets which you want to reuse in different components, but all the time in the same area. For example, you want to reuse this code snippet in other components when they get items. And there's even a option that you can actually add specific strings to the code. So you could say, let's say those just as a string, and maybe his, that's strings, and you separate strings via a comma. You start adding them with a plus, and you can save that. Now you're basically adding two arguments to this custom code. So if you open the custom code again, we explain here how to grab those arguments. So argument 1 would be 0. So I'm just going to say 0, and just add that argument, and then give it a little indent like that, and then add the other one, which is 1. So you have argument 1 and you have argument 0, which is actually the first argument. So you could say equals 1, and this is actually the second argument, which is equals 2. Just so you can see later when we compile this how those strings end up here. And you can add that in code. It could be an update of a function name, or even of an URL, or of another method it must call. You can be very creative in those implementations of the arguments that you pass. If you need to use any of the things that are part of the actual placeholder, for example the equal sign or even the plus sign, we left you with those are the ones you may not use. It's like the illegal characters to use in the placeholder passing of values. You can use these equivalent HTML placeholders or other strings, which would then amount in adding it here as a actual bracket and comma and plus and equals. Okay, so those are ways that you can achieve adding those values to these extra arguments, which ends up here. Okay, so this is an old custom code implementation. This is the original, this is the second implementation. The original I'll also show you in this tutorial because I want you to be able to clearly distinguish between these things. And it's quite important because they are really independent. They don't really work together. Although it looks like they do, they actually avoid each other. So I'm going to, over here I've added this placeholder, and over here I'm going to just add some more code to demonstrate the custom code options. Okay, and I'm going to save this and close out of that. So we've added custom code to the admin view of this demo component. We've also got some custom code in the components helper class, and we've used the placeholder. So now let's compile this demo component and install it onto this website. Okay, good. We've got it all installed. Let's go look at the code that was generated. So here we have the demo component in the administrator components area, and we added code to the model of the look, which should be this one. So we look in the get items method, and we see here's our code, and we see there's the those and there's the his, and those strings were correctly passed into our code, which gives it somewhat of a dynamic nature, as I pointed out before. Now if we open the list view, which is where we also added some code, we see some more code to demonstrate the custom code option. So it's been added. Now if we open the helper class, it's this one here, and we scroll down, we wouldn't take too long to find that methods. It's a little ways down. Oh, you know what? It was actually added to the site helper class. So we scroll down to components, demo, and then helpers demo, which is over here, and there we go. Here's the fancy date custom code that we added to the components helper class. So I'm first showing it to you in how it will appear without special treatment on the compiling process. Now we're going to compile the same component, and I'm going to trip one switch, and it will show you things you may not have realized before. The switch that we'll be tripping is this add custom code placeholders. So previously this would have, well, let me show you what it would have done. Let me just compile this. Oh yeah, collect the component and go. Install it, and now let's go look at the code. Now we see, well, let's first go to this first one. Where is it? So we see the JCB GUI tag is now added around our custom code. what is unexpected is that it actually shows the GUI data instead of the old implementation, because we know this is actually a custom code placeholder. But the reason why it doesn't actually fall back on the default, and I'll try to help you see that in a moment, is actually because of these placeholders. You see, according to JCB, the moment you add placeholders here, you're actually not able to do round-trip development, because how would we know in every location where that custom code is used what placeholders you intended? So there's a little bit of a reverse engineering nightmare. But fact be said, with the new GUI implementation, since it doesn't add the custom code placeholder, the initial one, which we'll show you in a moment, it actually falls back on the new one. But I would warn you that if you change this code now and you make the necessary adjustments, you will in effect reverse the custom code implementation. And maybe that none of this makes sense to you, so let me illustrate to you what I mean more practically. If we open that admin view again, we'll see, like I said before, there is a custom code placeholder here, and it has values being passed to this custom code. And that's why in the IDE it doesn't wrap it with the old implementation, but with the new. If I was to make a change here, but before I do, I want to just quickly grab this as a backup, because I want to put it back to show you in a moment. So I've just got a text document here, which I'll keep on the side here. I'm going to close out of this view so we don't interfere. And then here, to activate change, we just add this diamond between the JCB GUI, basically removing the dot. Now, you could go to the GUI and just go to admin view, this field, and this admin view ID, which is basically this ID here is this admin view's ID. So let's validate that. Here's the admin view, and that is his ID. So it is actually targeting the specific admin view's ID. But it also shows you in which field these values are added. So you could either go to the GUI and edit the value there, or you could do it here by adding this diamond in here, and then let's just add a bunch of E's here to make it very clear and save. Having done that, you're immediately going to update the value in the GUI, but the behavior is not what you would expect, and that's why I'll demonstrate this. So let's first run this one to show you exactly what happens. Obviously we go to the compiler, and we would, well, let's add the custom placeholders back again, but we'll just do a normal compiling. And then this time JCB is scraping that changes back into itself, and so when we install it and we go back to the compiler, we see that it added those E's back, and everything looks just, oh, it updated it and it looks the way it should be. Okay, whereas if we open the actual admin view, we'll see that it removed the custom code placeholder and it wrote it back into this custom code block, because of the fact that that custom code, which we had here originally, can be used in multiple component areas. We couldn't update the those and the his back to that custom code because of the limitation of not knowing for which one and all those kind of things, which is maybe not what you would expect. You would have wanted it to possibly write back your change to the actual custom code. There is a way to do that, but then you must not have any variables being passed. So to demonstrate that, then you see these variables, you need to remove them, the arguments, and obviously then save, and also go and update this custom code not to make use of those variables. So I'm going to just remove that like that and save and close. So now if we compile it again adding the placeholders and compile, you'll now see it actually falls back to the old implementation. Let me show you what that means. The old implementation is inserted. It has this inserted code, and then it has an ID. And that ID that you see here, again, this ID actually aims at the custom code ID. So here's your code. Now we didn't have a space in our custom code. We should have given it a little space here just for good practice. And I want to update this now, so I'll say updated this in IDE, and for this implementation we add a diamond to the above and to the below of this inserted code, and save the file, and we will then go into the IDE, into the GUI, and compile it. Now again, for good practice, let's show you, see, this custom code is actually number 1, which is the ID we saw in the IDE. So we could have just as well gone in here and updated the code here. It would have done, well, it's going to achieve the same. So I'll compile that now to show you that it writes it back. So we'll install it again, and we see that it wrote it back, it removed those diamonds. So it's not active now, it's not watching this space. It only watches it if you add the diamonds in. Now, if we go back to the custom code and we open this, we'll see that it added that change back into JCB's GUI. And well, that is really the round-trip development concept as it is now. There is a third, or actually the very first implementation was none of these two that I've shown you so far. The very first one was this one, where you don't have you don't start in the IDE with this one. So just heads up, this implementation which I'm going to show you now, you start in the IDE. You do not start it in the GUI, and it's actually called the hash automation implementation. The hash automation implementation you cannot start in the GUI because there's a lot of hashes that needs to be made, and JCB does that for you. You won't know how to do it. So the first two that I showed you starts in the GUI, writes back to this code, of course, but also adds wrapper placeholders around it so you could adapt it and write back to JCB. So I hope I haven't lost you at this point, but let's show you the first, which I call the original implementation. You also go into the GUI, and let's say over here you decide to add a certain chunk of code. You can either do an insert or a replace. So those are the two options. Obviously you need to open it and close it. So here we can now, I'm just going to take, what can I do? Let's take this code here and just paste it in here a number of times, just so we can have something to work with. And say, oops, okay, it's a comment, and save this, and maybe not that many lines underneath. So we've basically inserted our own custom code with this. This is a implementation I wouldn't encourage you to do that often. This is a last resort. It's like, I can't get JCB to do what I want, so I'm going to just hack the code. The reason why I don't encourage this implementation is because when JCB updates, this is the only implementation that actually can break. Now it doesn't break to the point where you can't repair it. It's almost like when you think about Git, when you merge two branches and they overlap, then it tells you that there's a problem and you need to go fix it before it can actually continue. It sort of does that. I'm not going to demonstrate that. There are tutorials. Go back into the playlist on YouTube. Look at those tutorials. Okay, I'm going to go ahead here and just compile the component to demonstrate to you this first implementation. I'm going to keep the placeholders, put them back into there, and okay, compile. And really, JCB at this point has scraped those changes into the custom code area. So if I was to close out of this one here, we'll now see there is a second item being added. It doesn't have a placeholder, it actually has a file path. And it says that it's the target type is not JCB manual, which is meaning we created it, but it's hash automation, which means JCB did it. And if you opened it, you'll see the code that we added being added. It has a hash here. It tells you it's an insertion. Now this file line number really is just for the record. When we can't find this fingerprint, which is what this is a fingerprint of the first, before we add the code, 10 lines are being used above the code to generate this fingerprint. If we can't identify this, which is the most accurate way of actually inserting this code, we'll fall back on this to add it as a comment. So we'll comment out the code and tell you within the compiler that there's been a problem and you must please fix it. So that's what the line number is for. It's not actually being used to insert the code. It's almost like a fail-safe if you think about it that way. Anyway, so it's added this. You could edit it here if you want to change it, and next compilation it will actually update it. But you could also, as we've installed it now, it added it back, and from the word insert, it changed it to inserted, like so that you can know this has been done. And it gave it the ID of the custom code. So if you now want to change this, you would add the diamonds in again and say, wait, this is way too overkill. We just want a 1, and we want to get maybe the user 22's details. Okay, and then save this. At this point, if we compile, the compiler will update the code again inside of JCB. So this, which I'm demonstrating now, this is the old original implementation. Now I didn't add the placeholders back again, so if I go back into the code, we don't see the placeholders. This is how you would usually ship your component. You don't want your clients to see the placeholders. In fact, JCB was built to sort of hide the fact that you used JCB. Well, we try to at least. So this is the original implementation. The second one was this one. This is the second one where we have these placeholders we can use across JCB in other custom code areas, if I could call it that. And then the last one, which came as a suggestion from the community, which is the one I'm going to demonstrate here, is actually going to maybe become the most used one. The others are a little bit challenging, I think, whereas this one is very nice. So let me show you now. Oh, no, not this one. This add custom code placeholders. I'm going to compile this again. Oh wait, before we do, I want to open demo, this one here. I'm just going to do a little commenting to show you that you can edit it in the GUI. GUI edited. Save and close, and compile it again. And so going back into the code, we see that it wrote those changes back. And so you have what they call a round trip development. You can come into the IDE, make changes here. If you do, remember to add the diamonds in. There are tutorials that explain this implementation maybe in a more closer manner than I'm doing now. But I felt like giving you an explanation of this with alongside the new implementation would help you hold perspective of the different concepts. So we'll talk about this first one as the original implementation. The second one, we'll talk of it as the custom code placeholder implementation. And the third one, which is the one we want to look at now, is the JCB GUI placeholder. JCB GUI placeholder implementation. This one is very nice because you can add a, like we did here, just some note, and you want to keep the lines right. You come in here and then you can add some values here, but just a heads up in relation to the fact that you cannot move this placeholder. So you can't decide, oh, I want this over here. You can't do that. The placement of the code cannot be changed because that's where JCB adds it and will always add it here. What you can change is the content of it, which is what is different between the second implementation, which we call the original implementation, which you can actually insert code anywhere and replace code anywhere, and that is the absolute freedom that you can have, whereas this one just gives you the option to actually change custom code in the IDE, add the diamond here to the top, save the file, and on compilation JCB will scrape the changes back into itself, so you won't lose those changes. And which is nice about this is, we refresh this page here, is it also adds the indentation back, so you sort of get that that real feel of round trip development. You'll see that it added this custom code placeholder here. This is a placeholder. That's not custom code. It's a placeholder called component. Now, why did it do that? Well, we are in a component admin view that is linked to demo, and so demo straight. The first part of the word demo is actually part of the component's name. So it updated that back. It has a little bit of a dynamic nature there. If this behavior is not what you would expect, then change a little bit of that wording there so you won't run into those issues. But yes, that is the new implementation, for you to be able to go into the IDE, see where that code ends up, of course, see what area it's from, what field it's from, and what admin views ID it's from, and then change the code as you like. You can change it completely if you like this, and it will still update it back into JCB. So let's compile and see that. Oh yes, remember to add the diamond in there. So I'm leaving out the placeholders now, and I'm compiling it again, and at this point it's scraped it, updated it, so that if I was to remember, I must now refresh this page because it's been updated. If I save it, obviously I'll lose those changes, and we see the values were added. It also added this component helper back, so that if we add the view into another component, it would work. Here it says demo, right? And now the placeholders don't show anymore, and you have your new value set, and that is the new implementation of what we want to call the GUI round trip development. yes, if that helps sort of to differentiate between these three concepts. Um, okay, so I hope this makes sense. I find these tools very useful. I rarely use the original that much because I want to stay sort of away from something that's going to cause me extra work later. Um, but I'm using the second implementation, which is the custom code placeholders, um, which I can use across JCB in other custom code areas like this one here. I'm using that quite a bit. And this new one where you're actually able to change code back here uh, is quite new, so I haven't started using it as such that much yet. But I'm very yeah, I think looking at all its advantages, I'm most certainly going to use it where it makes sense. So that is the explanation I hope many of you have been waiting for. To understand custom code in JCB isn't just knowing about this area. It isn't just knowing about areas inside of specific areas where you can add custom code. It is also knowing about placeholders, IDE, writing PHP. So it is a bit of an advanced topic, but I think for most of us this is exciting because now we can break out of JCB and integrate it with our normal development environment. Uh, and yes, so have fun. Speak to you again soon.